Thank you for that really kind introduction, Anna. I hope you're still pleased to have me in a few months. Really looking forward to starting work with Crae and being involved in all the amazing work that they do. Thank you all for coming and for spending the time to listen to what's going to be a bit of a historical perspective. I've been researching this topic for about 20 years now. And because I'm going to take a historical perspective, about 20 years ago, I started a job with Professor Uta Frith at UCL, obviously world-renowned autism expert. And this represents the kind of state of what we knew about autism at the time, using the language of the time, which describes difficulties recognizing, understanding other people's emotions in autism and problems expressing emotion for autistic people. And so when I arrived as a very naive researcher in Uta's lab, this was what I was told was the case. Then I met lots of autistic individuals and I thought this just doesn't ring true. Some of the most empathic people I've met ever were the autistic individuals that came in to kindly volunteer their time to help us with our research. And so I've started to look into this sort of a bit more systematically. And a quick Google search revealed lots of kind of online blogs and forums where people with autism, their friends, their family, were saying, this idea that people with autism lack empathy, can't understand other people's emotions, aren't affected by other people's emotions, it's just not true. Some people with autism were saying that, they didn't feel very empathic. It wasn't, universal, just as some people without autism say they don't have empathy. And so there was this weird paradox. Lots of the people I was meeting didn't seem to be characterized by all these emotional symptoms. And, lots of people, lots of self-advocates were saying that this doesn't characterize the way they feel. Looking at the research in the area, it quickly became clear that people were conflating two things. One was about understanding, recognizing, empathizing with emotions. And the other one was working out what people were thinking. And I actually think this was actually kind of poor theoretical work, which didn't separate out those two things. I think they are very different. Some of the work we've done suggests they're very different. So working out what someone is thinking is very different from working out what someone is feeling. And I think some of this disconnect was because people were talking about problems working out what people are thinking rather than these emotional aspects of autism. But even accounting for this problem, if you looked at something like all of the published scientific literature on the ability of autistic individuals to recognize emotional facial expressions, there's just a huge mess in the literature. So this was a big review of all studies on facial emotion recognition in autism. And the conclusion was that behavioral studies are only slightly more likely to find facial emotion recognition deficits in autism than not. So there just seemed to be a big mess, a big puzzle, a big problem. This kind of consensus that people with autism don't have emotions, don't know what they are, don't empathize with other people's emotions, don't recognize other people's emotions, the lack of emotional reciprocity. And the people I was meeting, the people I found in these forums online, and actually just the published research. So this was the kind of state of knowledge. And obviously it seemed clear that there was what scientists call heterogeneity in the autistic population and in the scientific literature. What does this mean? It just means variability. Some people with autism were saying that emotions are a problem with them. Some were saying that they aren't. The published scientific research suggested that people with autism had problems recognizing emotional expressions, for example. Other studies showed that they didn't. It was all a mess. And about this time, together with colleagues like Georgia Solani, Tanya Singer, Caroline Katmer, Uta Frith, we started to get interested in this condition that I pronounce alexithymia. Whether it's meant to be pronounced alexithymia, who knows? Feel free to pronounce it any way you like, but I say alexithymia. So as Anna described in her kind introduction, alexithymia is characterized by two things. Difficulty in identifying and describing your own emotions, and difficulty distinguishing between emotions and other bodily states. So somebody that's moderately alexithymic might be aware that they're having an emotion, but not sure whether they're sad, angry, or afraid, for example. Someone that's very alexithymic might not know whether they're having an emotion or whether they're just hungry or hot. Normally measured using self-report measures. So people read descriptions and they have to say the extent to which phrases like, I feel confused about my feelings, I don't know whether I'm tired or angry, about whether these descriptions describe them well or not at all. So that was the state of the field. Now, why are we interested in this? Well, the existing research in the area, and there was only 2 or 3 studies, maybe just 2, identified a really interesting pattern. And this was that about half of the autistic population seemed to have accompanying alexithymia. They found it hard to identify and describe their emotions, but the other half of the autistic population didn't. And this is compared to rates of about 7 or 8% in the non-autistic population of alexithymia. So this prompted about, I think, 3 main questions that are detailed here. And we wondered whether this, classically described emotional symptoms of autism, maybe they're actually got nothing to do with autism at all. Maybe they're actually due to alexithymia and the fact that maybe roughly half of the autistic population are also alexithymic. So following on from that, the second question is maybe it's alexithymia that can explain this variability or heterogeneity within the autistic population in respect to things like recognizing other people's emotions, expressing your own, feeling empathy, this emotional reciprocity. And the third question is, okay, fine, maybe it's alexithymia, but why is it the case that there's this increased prevalence in what's formally diagnosed at the time as autism spectrum disorder? And I think the thing to immediately make clear is that there is nothing unique to autism about a higher prevalence of alexithymia. So literally every single condition outlined in the DSM-5, the manual of different conditions, if you look at the literature on the prevalence of alexithymia in those conditions, you find it's elevated everywhere. So PTSD, substance use disorder, depression, anxiety, also things like traumatic brain injury, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, Huntington's. There is no particular relationship between alexithymia and autism. It's just the case that, as lots of other conditions, there's a higher rate of alexithymia in the autistic population. So we wanted to show that this is really true. And the first question we get asked, well, maybe it's the case that alexithymia is a symptom of autism, if we still think about symptoms, a feature of the autistic population. This is an example of a paper that we did on this a couple of years ago now, where we used a big data approach. We got data from, I can't remember, over 1,000 people. We did some fancy stats models. And what we were able to show is that it really is the case that autistic and alexithymic traits are distinct. They're different things. It's not the case that alexithymia is a consequence of being autistic. People are also worried about the measurement of alexithymia. It seems weird that you ask people to report on the difficulties they have. Maybe people are unaware of their difficulties. So in some work we did a while ago now, it was published a while ago, we tried to see whether it was the case that people really could determine their levels of alexithymia and report them using these questionnaires that we tend to use. So we use this study where really simple. We just asked people to watch a computer screen, and sometimes we showed them non-emotional pictures. Sometimes we showed them cute seal pops. Sometimes we showed them pictures that were designed to induce some emotional state. And when they saw each picture, we asked them to rate the degree of emotional arousal, how emotionally aroused they were from seeing the pictures. So we had their subjective report of how emotional they were, and we tried to get an objective measure of arousal by measuring their galvanic skin responses, a measure of physiological arousal. It correlates with things like how fast your heart is beating. And so the idea would be that if somebody is alexithymic and they can report it using these questionnaires, there should be a weaker link, a weaker correlation between how they say they're feeling, their subjective report of emotion, and the objective measure that we obtain using GSR. And that's exactly what we found for both autistic and non-autistic individuals. We found that people who said they were alexithymic had a weaker correlation between subjective and objective measures of emotion. So it seems like we really can measure alexithymia, and people with autism can report it. So back to this phrase that I don't like, emotional symptoms of autism, but again, we're taking a historical perspective. Is it the case that alexithymia can explain emotion processing in autism? So what we needed was this is a very simple cartoon here. The classic case that people were talking about lots around that time was this idea that people with autism lack empathy. Sort of seems crazy now, but that was the big question at the time. And so what we wanted was a kind of a cartoon model of how empathy happens. And so here you've got the cartoon model, and the idea is that the first thing you have to do right at the top of this diagram here is pay attention to the right parts of the world. You need to, for example, be looking at people and the right parts of people to even have a chance of working out what state they're in. Are they in pain? Are they upset? When you're paying attention to the right parts of the world, you need to be able to analyze people's behavior and the situation they're in, and correctly work out their emotional state and represent that emotional state. Realize that the other person's in pain, that they're upset, something like that. For empathy to occur, this understanding or representation of the other's emotion must cause you to change your own emotional state. You must be upset when they're upset. You must wince when they're in pain. And different theories of empathy argue about how important this final stage is. This working out that, okay, I'm upset, and the reason why I'm upset is because they're upset. So some people say that this is a crucial part of empathy. Other people say no, all that's necessary is that you're upset when somebody else is upset, for example. So we can already tell that if this ability to represent your own emotion, to work out that I'm upset because somebody else is upset, if that's a crucial part of empathy, theoretically, then it just stands to reason that people with alexithymia can't do this because they're not sure what they're feeling. So if this is crucial for empathy, then alexithymia should stop you being empathic, classically defined in this way. But what about the first parts, attending to the right parts of the world, for example? Well, there'd been lots of studies on this. We wanted to do a series of studies investigating these questions, and to do so, we adopted the same basic design. We call this a four-group design. We had a group of autistic individuals, a group of non-autistic individuals, and half of each group had high levels of alexithymia, and the other half had low levels of alexithymia. Why is this useful? Well, if we can compare this group with this group, we can find things that are associated with being autistic or not. If we can compare this group with this group, we can find things that are associated with being alexithymic. And this is important to try and separate out the influence of these two things, autism and alexithymia. So back to our looking at the right part of the world in order to be empathic. Again, around this time, people were getting very excited about using eye tracking methods for many reasons to diagnose autism. Um, but people were very interested in the relationship between autism and emotional processing using these eye tracking measures. So the idea is that autistic and non-autistic individuals would watch material, media, films, news, whatever, and eye tracking will be used to see what people were paying attention to. So the idea is that you can get two measures from this. So the first is something called social attention, which is just how much people look at faces, really. That's how it's defined. Faces or sometimes people versus kind of objects in the background, that kind of thing. But there's also something called emotional attention, which is when you're looking at the face, how much attention do you pay to the eyes versus the mouth? Why is this called emotional attention? Because we know that the ratio of paying attention to eye versus mouth is really important in recognizing emotional facial expressions. So this first study was embarrassingly small and a bit rubbish. But when we analyzed our data as everybody else does, ignoring alexithymia, what we could see here is that if we looked at social attention first of all, we can see this dotted line here means that you have no preference for looking at faces versus kind of background stuff, objects. And we can see that if you're not autistic, you've got a greater preference to look at faces. And if you're autistic, you prefer to look at not faces. When we looked at this eye versus mouth ratio, we found the usual effects, such that if you weren't autistic, you tend to look at eyes a lot versus mouths. Whereas if you're autistic, you had no preference really. But that's analyzing it the way that everybody else does. So when we decided to look at this as a function of alexithymia as well, what we were able to show was that autism scores, but not alexithymia, predicted your social attention. So whether you were looking at people, faces, bodies, whereas actually this emotion relevant measure, which is the ratio of time you spend looking at eyes versus mouth, was predicted by alexithymia, but not by autism. So there seemed to be two different effects. This was an early study. It was a bit rubbish. We did a much better job of this in 2021. More people, we had dynamic face stimuli. We modeled the temporal dynamics of gaze. We used some really cool statistics and machine learning. We had a number of different tasks, but the results were exactly the same. When it comes to this crucial attention to the eyes, which we know is so important in recognizing other people's emotions, it was alexithymia that explained attention to eyes, but not autism. This is really beautiful work by Elio Couve. Really robust. So when it comes to paying attention to the right parts of the world, in this case, eyes, it seems that actually it's alexithymia that explains looking at eyes, not autism. What about this next level? So when you are looking at the right parts of the world and you're trying to interpret people's behavior to work out what they feel. So we decided to look at the recognition of facial emotion in autism. This is obviously pretty crucial in working out what other people are feeling. We've already seen that this is an area with a mixed literature. Half the studies seem to suggest that autistic people have problems with this. The other half suggested they didn't. We needed to invent a new task to demonstrate that any alexithymia impairment or autism impairment is not due to this altered tendency to look at the eyes that we saw in our eye tracking measure, and specific to emotion, not just a general face processing deficit. So we use these weird stimuli. What we have here is, they're called cross-morph stimuli. So here we have one particular identity, Harold. Harold's expressing a certain emotion, anger. And here we have a different identity, Felix, and Felix is expressing disgust. And across here, we are morphing between identity, Harold to Felix, and emotion, anger to disgust. So using these stimuli allows us to test four things. Two tests of recognition. We can give people this picture, for example, And we can ask them to recognize identity. Who is it, Felix or Harold? Or we can ask them to recognize emotion. Is it disgust or anger? But we're also going to have perceptual versions of these. So we can give them two of these stimuli. So this one here and this one here, for example. And we can just say to them, is it the same emotion or different? This doesn't require them to know which emotion it is, that one's anger or one's disgust, just to say whether it's the same emotion or a different one. We can also do identity versions of that. So again, give this picture and that picture. Is it the same person or a different person? So if our hypothesis is true, it's actually alexithymia and not autism that's associated with a specific deficit in the recognition of emotion, then we should expect a really select pattern where alexithymia predicts problems recognizing emotions, but not identity. That's exactly what we found. So we didn't find an effect of autism on any of our tasks. We did find that alexithymia was selectively associated with impairment of emotion. These results have been replicated in faces and in the vocal domain and in music by a few people. So this is interesting. It seems that alexithymia is explaining a lot of these emotional difficulties, not autism. What about empathy, the big one? So this is a study that sounds a bit horrendous. I promise you it wasn't. So what we wanted here was a way to measure empathy objectively. And we needed a way that didn't require you to recognize emotions from faces, because we already know that people with alexithymia have a problem with this. It didn't require you to report your own emotion, because again, by definition, people with alexithymia can't do this. So we used Tanya Singer's empathy for pain task. This is a brain scanning study. And the way empathy is thought about here or operationalized is we measure brain activity when you're in pain yourself and see whether those parts of the brain are active when someone that you care about is also in pain. What did this look like? Well, here we've got an MRI scanner. We've got our participant lying in there. There's their feet. They're looking at a screen here. Here's somebody they care about, sibling, parent, best friend, whatever. Both of them have electrodes on the back of their hands that can deliver electric shocks. And all the person in the scanner can see are one of 4 colored arrows. So what happens here? Well, if they see the blue arrows, they know that they're going to get an electric shock. If they see the light blue one, this is not going to hurt. If they see the dark blue one, it is going to hurt. And before we do the experiment, we allow them to choose the degree of pain that they're happy with. It's got to hurt, but they've got to feel like they can take it. If they see these pink arrows, it means that their loved one is going to receive a shock. If it's light pink, it won't hurt. If it's dark pink, it will hurt. So we can look at what their brain does when they receive these shocks, these two, to find out how their brain responds when they're in pain versus not in pain. And we can, again, look in those parts of the brain identified as responding when you're in pain to see what happens in these conditions when their loved one receives a pain. So what did we find? Well, one part of the brain, the anterior insula and the anterior cingulate cortex, we showed this empathic brain activation. So this activation, this part of the brain is active when you're in pain and when someone you care about is in pain. This is just a representation of the results here just for autistic individuals. And you can see that if you're autistic without alexithymia, so low levels of alexithymia, there's really strong empathic brain responses. Whereas if you're alexithymic, there's not. These are those same results slightly more formally. What you can see is that alexithymia predicts the degree of empathic brain activity, whether you're autistic or not. And there's absolutely no empathy deficit whatsoever in autism. Some people don't like that test of empathy. Here's one that's very different. Can't remember when this was published, sometime recently, a couple of years ago. This one's much more, I don't know, people might prefer this one. So what we did here, we asked people to watch videos of people talking about an emotional time in their life. You've got an example here. And people had to do two things. They had to rate how the other person was, sorry, how the person in the video was feeling while they were talking. And they also had to rate how they were feeling in response. Crucially, we had asked the person in the video to tell us how they were feeling when they were talking. So we could do two things. We could see how well our participants could read the emotions of the person in the video, and we could look at their level of empathy and response. What we're able to show was that there were no differences between autistic and non-autistic individuals after accounting for alexithymia. So at every stage here, it seems to be the case that once you dissociate effects of alexithymia and autism, it's alexithymia that's causing the emotional problems. Also, expression production. There's been a growing literature suggesting that neurotypical people, people without autism, can't interpret the emotional expressions of autistic individuals. Again, it seems to be the case that it's actually the problems are recognizing the emotional expressions of alexithymic individuals, not autistic individuals. So, interim summary. I'm doing the time following. I think this research suggests that alexithymia is responsible for what used to be called the emotional symptoms of autism. Probably explains a lot of the variability within the autistic population when it comes to things like recognizing other people's emotions, empathy, emotion reciprocity. But I think it also potentially requires us to change our conception of what autism is, but certainly change the way we diagnose. I think some of our tests and this research here, in collaboration with Hannah Hobson, Francesca Happe, and a few people from my lab, suggests actually if you look at the ADOS, the Autism Diagnostic Observation Schedule, people with alexithymia were between 2 and 9 times more likely to be diagnosed as autism using this measure. And I think potentially a lot of our autism measures are actually picking up alexithymia in addition to autism. Probably not completely. Okay, hopefully this is interesting. The question is, well, what do we do about it? What is alexithymia? I guess the question normally is sort of how do you treat alexithymia? How do you fix it? And actually, the way I've tried to interpret that question is how do most people become lexithymic? How is it the case that you know the difference between feeling sad, angry, and afraid, for example? How is it the case that you know that you're hungry and not sad? So where does alexithymia come from? Where does lexithymia come from? We got to this stage, can't remember when, a few years back now, and we become interested in this thing called interoception. What is interoception? Well, put very simply, it's your ability to work out the state of your body. Working out how hungry you are, how thirsty you are, whether you need to go to the loo, how fast your heart is beating, your respiration rate. There's actually a huge amount of things that could be included in this interoception umbrella, and a little bit of debate about exactly what counts and what doesn't count. Why do we think it's interesting? Well, about this time, Carl Friston and Quattrocchi put forth a theory of autism which suggested actually interoception, if it's atypical, leads to autism. We didn't buy this. So their theory may or may not be right. To be honest, I don't know enough about the things that they were making the arguments about. But I didn't think the symptoms, in inverted commas, that they were trying to explain were features of autism. I thought they were features of alexithymia. So I became really interested in interoception. Why? Well, interoception is obviously useful for a load of things. Enables you to work out when you need to drink, to eat, to go to the toilet, enables you to monitor pain. It's obviously useful for basically keeping you alive. But it's also useful for a number of really fundamental things. Emotion processing, social skills, decision making. So if you think about emotions, I think every single theory of emotion recognizes that judging signals from your body is absolutely crucial. So let's think about how we might work out what we're feeling at any one time. Let's say our interoception is good, so we can work out that our heart rate has massively spiked. Well, if we're at the airport about to go on holiday, we might infer that our heart rate has spiked, has peaked, has got faster because we're excited. And so we're excited about going on holiday, and this is a positive thing. If you're about to give a public lecture and your heart rate has spiked, you might decide actually that you're incredibly nervous, you're incredibly anxious, and you would interpret the same objective thing, that your heart rate has increased, as a different emotion. So understanding the state of your body is generally accepted to be crucial for emotion. And some of the work that we've done shown that this definitely seems to be the case. So people that report problems with alexithymia, working out what emotion they're feeling, they also report that they forget to eat, forget to drink, find pain, they can't really explain it. People are much more likely to use external cues when deciding when to eat, for example. They don't wait till they're hungry. They decide, okay, I'm going to eat dinner at 5 p.m. or something like this. So there does seem to be a relationship between your ability to read your own emotions and to read other states of your body. But also, really interestingly, there's huge amounts of lovely theory. To be honest, bad data, but lovely theory linking interoception and pretty much all aspects of mental health. Schizophrenia, depression, autism, we saw the theory from Carl, obsessive compulsive disorder, eating disorders, everything. It's really kind of, I wouldn't say flavor of the month, flavor of the decade in explaining mental health. Why? Because it's thought to be a really good transdiagnostic explanation of things that are common to a number of clinical conditions. Emotional problems, somatic symptoms, having pain that you can't really explain, doctors can't explain, aches, disrupted sleep, learning decision-making difficulties, social difficulties. So lots of those general symptoms, but lots of specific symptoms. So clearly feeding and eating disorders, working out when you're hungry, when you're full, food avoidances, all kinds of atypical eating behaviors are thought to be explained by interoception, but also addiction cravings. It's really clear links there. But also panic symptoms and anxiety. Some of the best models of panic are all about actually not having, or sorry, having too much interoception, being too sensitive to small changes in your body that you then catastrophize about. This is some work by Francesca Happe. So in this paper, what they showed actually was that looking at adolescents with autism, they were looking at what predicts a lot of different features of the things that tend to go along with autism, such as depression, anxiety, and stuff like that. And what they found was that it was actually alexithymia that was the best predictors of anxiety and sensory symptoms. And the sensory symptoms part is I think, really interesting because some of the sensory issues that people with autism describe, you can really see are likely to be problems with interoception. So, for example, soft touch. It seems weird to think of this as an interoceptive sense because external touch isn't. That's not exteroceptive. But this soft, affectionate touch that a lot of people find incredibly nice and rewarding and is a kind of a social bonding signal, processed by the same parts of the brain the same physiological pathways as other interoceptive signals and is thought to be interoceptive. This prompted us to do a study looking at sensory symptoms, alexithymia and autism, in about 130 autistic twins and 80 matched twins without autism. And what we're able to show is that when you controlled for alexithymia, there was almost no relationship between autism and sensory symptoms, whereas actually there was a really quite big relationship between alexithymia and sensory symptoms. And because we had twin sample, we could do twin modeling, and the idea is that twin modeling gives you some idea as to the things that are explaining the different factors. So sensory symptoms, autism, and alexithymia. Ignore this diagram, it's a bit complicated. But what it shows is that the same genes that are associated with autism are also associated with, the genes that are associated with autism are not associated with sensory symptoms, but the genes associated with alexithymia are associated with sensory symptoms. So it seems that these two independent studies suggest that along with potential depression, anxiety, disrupted sleep, disordered eating, it's really alexithymia and by implication, interoception, that's causing sensory symptoms. This is really interesting when we think about the onset of a lot of mental health conditions in both autistic and non-autistic individuals. So the big risk factors for the onset of mental health conditions, depression, anxiety, OCD, are puberty, just following, well, pregnancy and following childbirth, and menopause. So each of these three times are associated with a massive change in physical and hormonal internal conditions. So basically at these conditions, you need to relearn your interoceptive signals. And we think, we've got a theory paper on this, that actually it's these times when you have to relearn interoceptive signals that you're at risk of certain mental health conditions. And this was data from, I think, quite a big study, 140 adolescents, where we showed that, at least in females, that the relationship between puberty and the onset of depression and anxiety in females was completely explained by alexithymia, such that puberty, and again, we're inferring that's caused interoceptive problems, leads to alexithymia, and alexithymia leads to depression and anxiety. Could well be the case. So what do we conclude? Well, I think hopefully you agree that we've shown that alexithymia is very distinct from autism. It's not the same thing. Alexithymia is not a consequence of, a symptom of, or whatever else you want to say, of autism, and it has different effects. It might be the case that alexithymia is responsible for what were thought to be emotional symptoms of autism. I don't like that phrase, but that was the phrase that's around. Also, there could be other things like depression and anxiety, which are higher in the autistic population than the non-autistic population. Alexithymia might also be related to poor interoception. We don't think interoception is the only route into alexithymia. So some theoretical and empirical work that I've done in collaboration with Hannah Hobson, Kenneth Lee, suggests actually if you have language impairment, then you're also more likely to be alexithymic. It kind of makes sense. Language is one of the ways in which we learn emotion concepts. And if you have language impairments, then it's going to impact on your ability to learn the emotion concepts themselves, but also to describe your emotions to other people. And it might also be the case that alexithymia can explain why some autistic individuals experience co-occurring sensory problems, sleep problems, and mental health issues. So thanks everyone for listening, and thanks to all of the absolutely astonishingly brilliant, nice, smart people in the world that I work with. They are all astonishing, and special mention to Caroline Katmer, we run our lab together. Thank you all for listening. Happy to take questions. Do you want me to stop sharing my screen, Brian?
Thank you. If you would, that would be amazing. May I thank you for an amazing talk. As you said, it was going to be a canter through 20 years of autism research. And it did mean that you had to go back to that time when the language that we used about autism wasn't as good as we could do. And you did it magnificently. Thank you. You went through those sort of core theoretical ideas that you had once upon a time. You then went to pull apart this distinction between alexithymia and autism to say that there is no empathy deficit. You talked about how actually we might need to change how we think about autism, how we think about the diagnostic background itself. And then you asked this big question. So how do we become lexithymic? Was that the word?
Yes.
Yeah. How do we become lexithymic? And you mentioned interoception, you mentioned language. Yeah, you pulled apart again how it could be a transdiagnostic thing. It's not just in our autistic population. Alexithymia, it happens all over the place. You talked about anxiety and you talked about the sensory world and how we can listen to ourselves and put ourselves into context. It was fascinating. I love a Crae webinar where someone in the chat just goes, "You have blown my mind." Congratulations. That is always a beautiful thing. We have so many, just people now just applauding in the chat, people who are fascinated, people who actually, and this is the big one, think they understand themselves more.
Oh, that's nice.
What else can we ask for? What else can we ask for? So it's brilliant. I will make sure that this gets posted online. Geoff, I might have to catch you at the end just to re-record the first slide. I have a handful of, oh, actually, I've got quite a few questions coming in now. First of all, very aware we've got at the most 13 minutes for questions. If I miss any questions, you have my apologies. I will try my best to squeeze them all in. Can I start off with a question from Tony, which I think you touched upon, but if you could unpack a little bit more. Tony says, I have never heard my heartbeats. Is this relevant to identifying emotion? And to add to that, if so, how?
Yes, it almost certainly is. So the first thing to say is that about a third of people can't feel their heartbeat at rest. So not being able to do so is not a cause for concern. Some people, myself included, can never feel my heartbeat. I can be at the gym working as hard as possible and I can't feel my heartbeat at all. There is no situation where I can.
Geoff, can I just go in there? I didn't know people could feel their heartbeat because I can't either. Ooh. Yeah.
And some people can. And I think it's really interesting. So some people have gone from this kind of research that we're doing. To be honest, there's a lot of not great research in the interoception world. But some people have gone from that research to asking, how can I train myself to be more interoceptive? This, I think, is much too soon. So you probably can train yourself to be more interoceptive, certainly when it comes to respiration. This is used for asthma. So people knowing how easily they're breathing, spot signs of an asthma attack earlier, it definitely works. Not so sure it works with heartbeats yet, maybe. But what you don't want to do is spend all your time paying attention to signals from your body and worrying about them, because that's almost certainly going to be bad for you.
Yeah.
So it's a good thing that you're not always paying attention to your heartbeat, because it happens that, frequently it would annoy you. So I don't think we yet know what's good and what's bad. And probably it all depends on context.
Very much so. To take that idea of context a little further, we have an anonymous question in the chat. There is so much to consider here. How has the impact of trauma and intersectionality and communication skills all been taken into account? How do we widen it out to this thing that is alexithymia?
We measure it, I think, and measuring it is quite hard. So So people argue that there's two types of alexithymia. There's something that you seem to be born with, and something that develops after trauma. Um, I wouldn't like to make a statement on whether that distinction is, I mean, clearly it happens. What that means in terms of the consequences for mental health, for emotion processing, anything else, um, hard to say. It really depends on whether it matters. So somebody that has grown up being fully aware of their own emotions and knows what it feels like to be scared, to be angry, to be disgusted, but then goes through a trauma and loses the ability to read that from their body, but they know what they once knew what it felt like. You could argue that they should be kind of better prepared to talk about, conceptualize, understand emotions than somebody that from birth has really struggled to work out what they're feeling. That should be the case. I'm not 100% sure yet that it is.
Another question that links nicely and segues together is if there are, do we feel alexithymia for different emotions, or is it for all emotions?
Good question. Very good question.
Wasn't it? I do like the chat. They're very good.
Great, good audience. There used to be an idea that alexithymia, or at least some people with alexithymia, might just have a problem for negative emotions. I think that's based on quite poor research. So what that tends to be based on is pictures of emotional expressions, and there's one happy one, just one positive one, and lots of different negative ones. And so it's just easy to spot the positive one. So I don't know. There are reports with people with certain. So one thing we did was look at people who've been in the Vietnam War, and they had a brain injury from shrapnel, basically. And we were able to map out the parts of the brain that are involved in interoception and in language. Damage to those both produce problems with working out what you're feeling. Kind of cool stuff. But there are instances where people have had brain tumors, strokes, where they lose the ability to recognize just one emotion in themselves, something like disgust. And so it's a great question, and the answer is we probably don't know yet.
So one of the questions in finding out these things that we don't know, and we've got it in the chat and we've got it in the Q&A, is now that you're part of Crae, how does that go together with participatory research? How might you design these wonderful things to find things out?
I mean,
It isn't a job interview anymore.
it's sort of hard not to be participatory when it comes to alexithymia and interoception, because it's a deeply personal thing. Measuring it objectively is incredibly hard, because measuring emotions is very hard. And so actually just asking people about their experiences is actually the most crucial thing. And if you've got people who communicate in different styles and different ways, then asking them can be quite hard if you just come from one perspective, from a non-autistic neurotypical perspective, for example. And so it's pretty hard not to be participatory, to be honest.
I think you're right. We need to make sure that the communication that's going on doesn't come a cropper in the double empathy. Double empathy problem may be going in multiple directions. We have a question from Kathy, who is interested to know how you think alexithymia is connected to ADHD, given that up to 80% of autistic people may have or ADHD. I've seen some numbers at 30%. But enough said, there's enough overlap.
Yep, there's definitely research suggesting that alexithymia, certainly the case. There's increased prevalence of alexithymia in the population of individuals with ADHD. And people linking interoception to attention switching, ability to concentrate. So I think I haven't done this because I just haven't had the time. But I think if someone was interested in this, they would find a very rich field to mine when looking at the relationship between interoception, alexithymia, and at least some of the characteristic features of ADHD.
I like that. Okay, I don't have a follow-up, but I like that. We've got only 5 minutes left, and I've just done a quick count. I have at least 23 questions, so I'm not going to be able to answer them all. So apologies, I will just do what we can. Lovely question, with the apologies for potential stereotyping involved, from Sarah Jane. Is it not the case that people have a default mode of emotional response? So how far might this be socially conditioned? For instance, and we do go back a few years for this, men might be likely to be default to anger instead of other emotions. And apologies for that stereotyping.
So the answer probably depends on a number of things. It depends on where you think emotions come from and the role of culture in emotions. I personally think that's massive. Other people might disagree. One thing that's quite interesting, I guess if there's a theme in my work is that we don't measure things very well. And so trying to fix that problem. And actually, I think a lot of the things we think about gender with respect to socio and emotional abilities are probably due to bad tests. So we've developed some new tests of theory of mind, emotion inference, and we've tested a lot of people and found no gender differences whatsoever. So I'm a bit on the fence. So I think it's very likely that there is cultural learning in working out what we're feeling and how we should display emotions and what emotions are appropriate. And I think those cultural expectations are often gendered. But whether I think there's anything intrinsic to gender, not sure yet.
I've heard it said that the best place to test for culture is in yogurt. We have 3 minutes for one last question. And I do like this one. Anonymous attendee, what research are you working on now or have plans to be doing in the future?
Loads.
You now have 2.5 minutes to tell us. Actually, can we have the first one that you would love to be able to do? Then go on to the ones that you can do.
I think I don't like a lot of the negative stereotypes about autism. But whether I like them or not, you could say is irrelevant. The question is, are they accurate? And so what I've been trying to do for 20 years is trying to get decent tests that aren't biased against autistic individuals. I think a lot are. Just to find out what the answer is. And I'm getting more and more interested in theory of mind. And I really want to look at some of the assumptions we've held for a long time about theory of mind, but I'm also very interested in pain perception, especially in people who find it hard to communicate.
I'm now worried that I have to share an office with you sometimes.
Well, you know if it happens to you.
It is time for us to wrap things up. Geoff, thank you ever so much for your time. Thank you so much for your expertise, and welcome to Crae. Take care, people. Look after yourselves.